So about 3 years ago, I got my daughter's boyfriend's Trek 820. This was my first probably full rebuild, from painting all the way up to rebuilding. Stripping the bike down. Some good things about this bike: good saddle, good pedals. Had a good frame in that it didn't have any big dents in it. Some scratches, particularly in the kickstand area. What I did discover is that the fork was completely seized up, and just an inexpensive fork, right? A spring fork had no, it was just locked up down. So unexpected cost in replacing that fork. So here's what it looks like when I was done stripping it down. Just a solid bike, right? An 820 was a entry-level mountain bike. Chromoly steel, decent paint scheme for back then. This is 2010, so it was pretty cool. You can see it was kind of banged up at that kickstand, but generally a good bike. So my plan, convert this to a 9-speed, which I needed a hub. It had a freewheel originally. I had an old hub on a wheel that was buckled. So there's our buckle in that wheel. And the original wheel was a freewheel, so I stripped that down. Luckily, the spokes from the freewheel fit the rim, and I was able to reuse that rim. I had built up wheels in the past, so I kind of knew what to do here. If I'm at the shop, I'll use the truing stand to build a wheel, but I just did the zip tie method and got the wheel in good shape. Prepping for paint here, rough sanding. So I didn't take the decals completely off, just rough sanded the whole frame in order to get ready for primer. Basically scoured off the rust. So here's what it looks like before primer. Just a good rough sand, smooth it out, take those blemishes off. Primer was a sandable Rustoleum. So the idea here is that I'm building up a coating of paint in order to smooth everything out when I get to the finished coat. So from here it's going to be some wet sanding, right? So I'm wet sanding the frame. This is the first of a couple times wet sanding. Weather is changing. It's chilly out. I'm in the driveway trying to get in the sun, stay warm. But a quick wet sand with 800 grip, and then I wiped everything down. Then another coat of paint goes on after this. The frame had fallen down once, so I was really careful with it. So we got an all-in-one Krylon Fusion gloss black. I learned a little bit here, probably that I could have just used the Krylon to paint our color on it, because it does have a primer component as part of it as well. Next, I got to sand again. So I used 1500 wet dry sandpaper again. Sanded the whole frame completely down. This went really quick. Don't think it took a long time. With that wet dry sandpaper, wetting it down every time, it goes really fast. Literally 8-10 minutes I was able to sand everything down, wipe it down, and get it ready for paint again. So one of the things I learned, I probably should have let the paint harden more in between these top coats. Everything worked out, but with a harder paint, it's going to sand off a little bit cleaner. Wind started kicking up on this day. You can see I don't have my glasses on, so my head is getting right in there and the wind is blowing. So without glasses, I can't see hardly crap, but I didn't want to get paint all over my glasses, so this is what I ended up with. Paint went on well. I did like how the color turned out on this bike. So decals next. I let it dry for about 3 hours and stuck those guys on. Decals, it was kind of cool putting decals on. It was like putting some style onto this frame. Little badge up there on the top tube, and then a big Trek logo along the top tube and the down tube. Turned out really neat. I forget where I bought these. It was relatively inexpensive. I think it was like an Etsy seller that I bought these from. Pretty cheap. Worked out really well. From here, the little close up, you can see those logos. The Trek logo turned out pretty nice on there. And basically got to clear coating. I want you to notice how much wind there is at this point. And I'm downwind from a parking lot, basically. And bad idea. It did pick up more grit than I wanted from that parking lot. I think I would have waited for a little bit better day, but turned out okay. I mean, my blemishes were pretty insignificant. So here it is, back down in the basement. Let it dry for 2.5 days or so before I really jumped into rebuilding. All right, so here we go. Our first part, C2 clamp. Got it on. Grease up our seat tube. All right, I kind of lied. That seat clamp was not the first part. I actually went over to the shop and put in the headset bearings just because I had all the equipment there. I've beat them in with a hammer, but I didn't think that would make for a good video. New stem, shorter, with a little bit of rise. A really generic bearing set for the head tube. Here I was playing with different ideas for handlebars. These ones are got like a 30-degree sweep back. Had them in my bins. I take these to work in order to see what might fit for them. Here's the bars I actually ordered for the bike. Not as much sweep, but about 50 millimeters of rise. You can see there, just a generic Bucklows brand. I've had good luck with these. So after this, I think I stuck on a set, or I played with the idea of a 90-degree rise handlebars. You'll see that in a minute. I think these 50 millimeter rise were the right choice. You know, maybe I think they were a 5 or 10 degree sweep back versus that first handlebar was probably about a 35-degree sweep back. So what's on the bike is a 50 millimeter rise versus the 90 I'm comparing to. So I think that was the right choice. Somewhere here I lost my footage of actually completely mounting on the front brakes, but it's pretty straightforward, right? Stick them on, bolt them down. The brand I used was called a CNC brakes. I really liked the spring pressure on these brakes. Really gave a good feedback in the hand themselves. Again, straightforward, mounted them on, bolted them down. Had a red pad that really stopped well as well. Bottom bracket next. Threads were in good shape. I think I did clean those up with a die at work. I don't remember. Putting in the bottom bracket, straightforward. This is a 122.5 millimeter bottom bracket. I found out later it was probably too wide. Is what it is though. 1 by Drivetrain 32 tooth chain ring. And I had that mounted, if you see, on the outside of the spider. It looked really cool right there. Later on I get to switch that around because my chain line is off. I'll show you a little technique for evaluating your chain line as we get into putting the chain on. Straightforward. This was just some generic Sun Tour crank. So it's 26-inch tubes, and then just literally the cheapest mountain bike tires. These are Swin mountain bike tires for 26-inch. They actually look pretty cool once I got them on the bike and mounted. A really aggressive tread pattern. Worked out well with this bike. straightforward. You can see that rear wheel I built up had the free hub versus that free wheel. A couple things I'll talk about later on is what I learned in this process. That free hub was a good idea. It allowed me to put on that cassette that I'm going to show you in a minute. Oh, here's those tread patterns. Get it to start looking like a bike. That cassette on the bike right there was just a generic one I bought during COVID times when I could not get a 9-speed cassette for my mountain bike. Just some off-brand. Did not shift as smooth as I would have liked. Front wheel going on, straightforward. You can see that generic fork on the bike now. Just an off-brand fork, suspension fork I bought from AliExpress. Worked out well. It's looking like a bike. Looking like a bike. On goes our brake levers. These are some used ones for my bins. And then I think I bought a shifter for this bike. 9-speed Alivio shifter to match up with a 9-speed derailleur I already had. Some generic Amazon, I think these were Bucklows grips as well. I did like those, they were double locking. Here's something I did on this bike as well. I drilled out the cable stops so I could fully thread cable housing all the way through to the rear derailleur and the rear brake. What would I do different there? I'd probably use a compressionless housing on those housings versus the standard housing that I got. So brake installation was pretty typical. Did like how these brakes stopped, and I do love the feedback pressure on these brakes. They are stiff in the hand, right? It's going to return those brakes off of that wheel every time. Tuned in quickly. Just centering and a little bit of playing with our centering springs. So here's the front brakes. Went on straightforward again as well. Really like these CNC brake assemblies. And, a great little price on them, so. We get to straighten the derailleur hanger. Surprise, so this bike was 15 years old, let's say, and I really didn't have to do much to straighten that hanger. A little tweak on it was all I needed. Alivio 9-speed long cage, rear derailleur. Mounted it up, and I think I set my stops real quick. Yeah, put the limits. I think I played with the B limit as well. Pretty straightforward. Again, that cassette was just a generic cassette I bought on Amazon. You're going to get to see that I did a couple things wrong. Got to learn a little bit, and I get to explain to you here coming up. So again, my housing. Full housing all the way back to the derailleur. So I drilled out those stops and put a full housing in. I think that was a good decision. I do like that for the shifter. Again, shifters will have compressionless housing, so you don't have to worry about having any deflection like you might on the brakes themselves. Playing with the length of the housing, kind of getting everything to match. This bike ended up looking nice and clean with the cable housing, so a couple little hooks kind of managing our housing or the cable housing, so turned out pretty nice. Chains up next. Here's one of the things I did wrong. Watch closely. I know it might be out of focus. Once I get it cut, I actually route this chain incorrectly over the rear derailleur. Rattled like crazy until I figured out what was going on. I'll mention when I fix that. So here's the first spin of that crank. I'm liking how it turns out. but a little bit of learning along the way. Clamping up our cable, straightforward. I did play with this derailleur more than usual, and actually was making noises, and I'm like, what the heck's going on? If you look closely there, that chain is running over the bracket on those cages. And I was like, you know what, I'll come back to it. I'll come back to it. So tightening down my grips, putting in the pedals. These are the pedals that came with the bike. It got a little red accent on it, and it worked out really well. Got those tightened on pretty quick, pretty straightforward. Easier to tune in the derailleur when you got some pedals, that's for sure. All right. Clinking and clattering more than I like. Scratching my head. So I'm looking at the chain line at this point. You're going to notice something here coming up. I do change that chain on the rear derailleur, but my chain line ends up being off. So look closely. Next view is the chain corrected. Right, but now I'm struggling with chain line. So here's a little tip. If you think the chain line might be off too much, give your cranks a reverse spin in the big cog or the lowest gear. That's going to tell you if your chain line is off. So watch closely here. See how that chain walks down on the cassette? That's the surest sign that you've got a bad chain line. So I get to go through the fun of switching up that front chain ring. So I do that real quick. I think it actually ended up looking better as well with the chain ring on the inside. So moving that gives you about 5 to 7 millimeters of change in the chain line. So for me, that corrected this nearly 100%. It's a narrow wide chain ring. So there we go, spinning backwards. Again, the key is to spin it backwards when you're in gear number 1 or your biggest ring in the back. Nice and clean at that point. Now I start adjusting our barrel adjuster. With that stuff in place, it starts to actually tune in pretty quickly. I always like to get it tuned in and then actually try to throw the chain off. So you're going to see me jumping around on that rear cassette, up and down 2 or 3 or 4 gears at a time to try to get it to jump. Done. What do we get to do? Clip it and dress it up. I think after this I jump into putting the saddle on. Well, this is the original saddle that came with the bike. And that red accent worked out really well. It wasn't beat up at all. It's actually a pretty comfortable saddle. Put that on real quick. Tighten up my seat post a little bit more. Hop on the bike to see how it feels. Check a couple little things. Alright, I do notice that the stem is not straight to the wheel, so I button that up. A lot of times when I'm building up a bike, I actually will intentionally turn the stem to the side in order to remind me to come back and play with it. I'm liking it. Here's our glamour shots next. So a 1x, I think there was a 32 tooth front chainring, 9-speed cassette in the back, with the biggest cog being a 42. It's got an Alivio derailleur in the back, Alivio 9-speed shifter. Those CNC brakes worked out real well. Just a little bit of red accents all around. I could have went with red cables. I did not. The decals went well. Shifting turned out pretty good. Like this bike, I ended up giving it back to my daughter's boyfriend. I don't even know if he's ridden it yet. So if you're out there, get on this bike and ride it. That's what bikes are made for. Had fun with the decals on this bike as well. It was one of the highlights. What would I do different? I think I'd use a 2K top coat or clear coat. Wouldn't have put that top coat on during a windy day. I probably would have went with a name brand Shimano rear derailleur as well. I think the shifting could have been a little bit better. So there it is, the 2010 Trek 820. And as always, I want you to remember to keep pedaling.